Oh,
Hi, everybody. Very happy to be live with Greg Mosse. You are going to start us off with a little intro to you and your book.
I know you just sprung that on me. It's a good
Oh,
job.
no,
It's not the first time I've done that in the last 2 weeks.
sorry.
So The Coming Darkness is a thriller set in 2037 in a future that is just arm's length away from us. It's today, but more so. All the things that we're worried about right now have become more urgent and more intense. And in the midst of that is my hero, Alexandre Lamarck, who is an operative in the French secret services, who at the beginning of the book thinks that the next phase of his life is just going to be like the previous phase, obeying orders. But he quickly discovers that the orders he's being given are not orders that a reasonable person can respect or obey. So what that means is that he's got to make judgments, and he can't simply fulfill the demands of his superiors. Now, that also means that he's looking into things that he has not been delegated to look into. And of course, that for the world that I depict 15 years in the future is fundamentally important, because he goes his own way, because the woman he loves, Mariam Jordan, also goes her own way, independently of his investigation. They're the only people on the trail of the appalling catastrophe which otherwise will happen in the last quarter of the book.
Good description.
Thank you.
So, my first question was wondering why you'd chosen sort of to go for a near future sort of setting.
So it's an odd thing. Two real reasons, I would say. 40 years ago, I was an interpreter, and I was working in international organizations in Paris. And I worked on, I worked on, it was an eye opener for me. It was a window on, it sounds awful to say it, but it was a window on global tragedy. For example, the Union Carbide factory that exploded in Bhopal, India, from whose aftermath people are still dying today. The Torrey Canyon oil disaster. I mean, I could list them. The point is, as an interpreter, um, you're just a functional part of the worst news, or at least that's how it seemed to me, that happened each day. So there's that in the past. But of course, if you're concerned about environmental degradation, if you're concerned about the fact that when I was writing this book, the west of the United States was on fire, whilst the southeast of Australia was underwater, if you're concerned that populations are being moved by famine and drought, I think what you want is to find at least a semblance of a pathway through that offers cooperation and a possible better future. So that's what I've imagined. 15 years hence, there are international organizations that are stronger than those we have today that are confronting all those perils.
Do you think that setting, and this is just a pet kind of question of mine, setting a book sort of slightly near futury when it's a crime kind of thriller book makes it a little bit more of a harder sell to people?
Well, the thing is, Kaz, you can only sell your book to people who are likely to enjoy it, right? If I'd written a romance novel, I would be trying to reach that audience. When the lady from Waitrose magazine rang me up to do an interview, her first question was, "Are you okay with it being called cli-fi? Climate fiction?" And of course, I said, um, whatever speaks to readers and tells them most clearly what the book is, that's how we should describe it. And isn't that the case for any product? It's really stupid to try and sell something. If I try and sell my book to people who aren't likely to enjoy it, well, they're going to tell people they didn't enjoy it, and there's no upside for me in that, is there?
No, I probably didn't word the question well. I
Go
think
on then.
just that I like books sort of set in a near future. I think it's quite interesting when we ask those what if questions and think about how things are gonna change, and that for me is a selling point. But I think sometimes when people are marketing stuff and they know that people are gonna read a thriller like yours and really enjoy it, it also being set in a near future makes it a bit harder for them to know how to market it.
I think you've just got to buy into that, and you've got to sell into that core audience. Make sure that I was working with a theatre and TV director this morning, and we were talking about just this question in relation to the decks that people send out for investment. You know, they're essentially PowerPoints or PDFs, and they're full of text and images. And the idea is that they tell people exactly what the show is. And I think that the publicity for a book should do the same. It should not try and be all things to all people. It should, and you might be right. But then when I was talking to the delightful people in Stenning Bookshop last night, they were saying, we're really looking forward to having the paperback because hardbacks are a bad sell, or not a bad sell, but a hard sell. And Moonflower have done a wonderful job creating a gorgeous hardback copy of The Coming Darkness. Um, but there's a limited audience for that format, isn't there?
Have you got a hardcover to show
Y-
us?
Yeah, yeah. Hang on a second. Let me go. It's just on the shelf in the corner. I'll be back.
Okay.
So you've had the paperback advanced reading copy, which is,
Yep, that's the one
that's
I read.
that's that's that. And whereas alongside it is like that's the sort of wardrobe sized The Coming Darkness, which is the one that the publisher's really keen on because of the gradient sprayed edges.
Oh,
The
look at that.
They
Lovely.
really love that, yeah. And of course, this doesn't have typos in it, whereas this does have typos.
We've got some hellos. So Laura's said hello. Lindsay has said hello. Lindsay has also said that she loved your book. Uh,
This is great. We love that sort of thing.
she, I think she blogs as Books by Bindu.
Yeah, I think I saw that, and I was very grateful for all kind mentions.
Yeah, Donna has said hi.
Hi, Donna.
Leslie has said hi. Lindsay loves a hardback. So
I know that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's purely the thing that that the shopkeepers say. They know that they can sell a lot. If they had a bunch of them that look like this, the paper like the ARC, they know that they can sell more. But um, but also it's the structure of the industry, isn't it? And the industry caters first for people who love the physical object, even though I mean, some people say it's too big to read in bed. I don't know. I mean, it's good point size and everything. It's not hard to read in bed, but it is heavier, obviously, than paperback format. What, what about you? I imagine you're a lover of books. I imagine you like hardbacks.
I do, but I would tend to not read them in bed.
Ah, there you go.
And I will buy hardbacks, but because I buy so many books, I try to stick to paperback.
You see what Laura said in the chat there. I think it's so true. And I'm also in the habit of taking off the dust jacket and putting it aside because that just gets in the way. So reading the bare covered book and then put the dust jacket back to put on the shelf.
Yeah, that's what I do with mine. Take the
Okay,
dust jacket off.
okay, that's what we do.
Hmm. Keeps it nice and pristine as well. I like all my books to look like really nice. If they get messed up, I'm not happy.
I know what you mean. We have Kate, my wife Kate Mosse, and I have so many books that when we moved to this house in Chichester, we didn't organize them, and so it's chaos. And there's bookshelves in almost every room, including bathrooms. And it trying to find something is chaos. Kate is currently writing a book set in the early 17th century, which has two big sea voyages on it, one from Amsterdam to the Canary Islands, and then they sail on to South Africa. They are amazing pioneers and explorers. And she wanted to find the William Golding books for which she wrote an introduction a year or two ago. and it took her almost a whole afternoon to find them among the thousands of books on the shelves. Oh dear.
I think that's possibly a peril that everyone who loves books has, isn't it?
It is. That is the peril.
So tell us a little bit more about you. You've had quite a range of experiences. So you've taught, you've been an interpreter, you speak lots of different languages. You're kind of fascinating just on your own without the book.
I wish it was lots of languages. To be fair, I've only ever worked in English, French, and Spanish. I have over the last decade or so, maybe a bit more. I've done quite a few. I've worked in the Middle East quite a few times. In Qatar, where the World Cup is about to start, in Sharjah, and most of all in Dubai with the Emirates Airlines Festival of Literature, which is an amazing festival in its own right. It has a very diverse set of authors that are invited to it. And it has brilliant educational programs that go into primary and secondary schools and universities, and best of all, the prison system. So the authors go in and work with offenders, and the program has been so successful, it's been copied in Abu Dhabi and Bahrain. Anyway, long story. So each time I've been to the Middle East, I've thought I must learn more Arabic, and then I use it and I think, God, I'm really good at this. This is great. And of course, 6 weeks after I get back, I can't remember a word. So towards the end of was it when was it end of the summer, I decided for the first time that instead of just trying to memorize phrases, I would try and become literate in Arabic. And so I'm trying to learn to read and write. And of course, that means I'm reading and writing like a 3-year old, but it is at least something. And I hope it's going to stay in my mind. So that's the languages thing. Then the other important thing, I guess, in my background is all of the theatre. My first career was in theatre, and I did a degree at Goldsmiths College in New Cross in southeast London, and out of that went straight into working in theatre. And my most recent work, because of course then I had the whole of life in between. My most recent work before becoming a novelist was also theatre. For the last 8 years, I've run a script development program in the West End at the Criterion Theatre on Piccadilly Circus. And alongside that, I've written and produced about 25 of my own plays, lots of them in collaboration because I also write. I write songs, but I might write the tune, but I won't write the accompaniment. I won't score it for different instruments. So I have a composer partner, and I've also had a couple of writing partners who are also playwrights. So in between those things, there was helping my wife in her career, bringing up children, including home educating our son Felix, who is also now a writer, having been a brilliant West End actor, looking after my wife Kate's parents, Richard and Barbara, who are both now dead, and my mother, who at 92 years old is still around. So all of those family things sort of intervened in the middle life.
I'm curious as to what you've written sort of script wise and how that's helped you with the coming darkness.
So there's two aspects to it. And one of them is actually something that my editors, because I have, we'll come on to this, but I have another series which is more purely crime that will begin to publish next year. But before we come on to that, just to say that my editors in both series, so The Coming Darkness and its sequel, The Coming Storm, and the crime series that begins next year, my editors encourage me to say more about what people are thinking and feeling. Whereas in writing for the theatre, that's what we call subtext, isn't it? It's the thing that the audience perceives, but the character doesn't say. And it's a difference in the two media. Um, Another thing, though, is I've worked a lot with screenwriters for film, but above all for TV. And that means that my mind easily goes into an episodic structure. So if you if you took apart The Coming Darkness, it would be you could easily break it down into 10 or 12 sections, and they could sort of stand alone as kind of stories that would just about make sense in their own right. Although, of course, they're better when they're linked together.
Just remind Leslie about your genre and book topic.
Okay, so The Coming Darkness is a future thriller set in 2037, and an operative of the French Secret Services has to try and prevent a potentially globally catastrophic act of vast terrorism. I'll say another thing in relation to your question earlier about the crossover with the crime or mystery market. Alex solves the mystery like a detective. He picks up information from different sources, from different people. He has to travel to find things out. So it does have at the heart of it that solve a mystery pattern, but at the same time, it's very much a thriller rather than rather than a whodunit.
Yeah. Leslie said speculative action thriller.
Oh, that's brilliant. And don't forget, Leslie, that the lady from Waitrose, when she interviewed me, she said cli-fi, climate fiction.
But so it's quite geographically diverse, isn't it? The Coming Darkness. You start off in France, but it doesn't stay there.
No.
Were you sort of talking about your work in Dubai and places like that? Is that what inspired you to move it to the Middle East with?
I think it is. When you write what's inside you, don't you? So, even if you're setting something 15 years in the future, and although I was an interpreter in those international organizations, I was never a spy. Um, but also when I started writing it was in lockdown in November 2020. So all of the terrible news that I was reading from across the globe, that was inside me too. And um, the the two important places in North Africa are Egypt. And what I imagine in 15 years is that Egypt has become an isolationist state, self-protective, closing its borders, restricting travel for its population, but also incomers, and that's its response to a sequence of global crises, both environmental and virus driven. And then the other one, which very much arose out of being in rooms where politics were discussed um, as an interpreter, the the when Gaddafi fell, um, Libya descended into civil war, and those civil wars, there were sort of four civil wars straight away, but the country is still not united. And it seemed to me that it would be interesting, an interesting way of giving myself more narrative freedom to invent a country that has seceded from Greater Libya and wants to take a new path. And so one of the secondary characters, who's one of the heroes of the book in a way, is the prime minister of this seceded nation of Cyrenia, who wants to make her nation a haven for the distressed refugees of Saharan Africa. But she also wants to find a route through cooperation to a brighter future. Because, of course, that's a really fundamental conflict at the heart of the book between people who see a route through cooperation to a better future and people who think that everything must be torn down in order to start again.
I am very much like that character. She was one of my favorites.
She's great, isn't she? When I
Mm.
was talking to Samira Ahmed the other night, I'm sorry, I'm slouching in my chair here. The She said how much she liked the strong Muslim characters, female above all Muslim characters in the book, and um, I think it was a great compliment, I thought, and I was really delighted when Samira told me that because, of course, they're goodies and baddies. They're not they're not all trustworthy.
No, they're definitely not. Laura said, "Did you have any experts that you could call upon to help?"
Okay, so there was my experience, right? But remember, we were in lockdown. I do have a couple of colleagues from one who's still working in the OECD, one at the World Bank, and I did talk to both of them on Facebook, so I'm in touch with them. But I'd say this as well, Laura. The future is surprisingly easy to research because any responsible organization is always thinking about in 2 years, in 5 years, and then by extension, in 15 years. So you can find in the popular press or the specialist press um, discussions of what will be happening. And of course, they're, throw back to all those years ago when I started being concerned with the environment. I remember being at a conference where they were discussing the depletion of the Spanish freshwater aquifers, which had taken many thousands of years to fill up and which were being drained at an alarming rate in order to grow strawberries that English people would throw away in February because they never got around to eating them. And that obviously is another reason for setting it a little way into the future because those predictions from 40 years ago, like today's predictions, they're coming true. I remember when I was a kid, David Bellamy was on television. Do you know who I mean? He was a biological scientist and naturalist, had a wonderful voice, big beard, really enthusiastic. And he was talking about these things and he was mocked, of course, because he was talking about a future that he could not prove. But the truth is, when there's a consensus around the future, it's the people who disagree who have the responsibility to prove that they're right. And of course, they can't.
I have got to ask you, because of your theatre kind of background, one of our favourite questions, which is while you were writing, did you ever act out a scene as you were writing?
In my head all the time. Yeah, absolutely. But that's a knack, I think, that if you're lucky, you sort of develop as a writer. Lots of people say, lots of my writer colleagues, they say you should read your script aloud and then you'll hear if it's any good. But I think because of all the theatre I've done, I can already hear it in my head, and I do hear it in different voices. But I very seldom, for myself, would read it aloud. On the other hand, I taught a 2-day weekend for the Bridport Lit Fest a couple of weeks ago with my friend Jason Goodwin. And he's a wonderful writer of history and travel, and he's also written 5 wonderful detective stories set in the first half of the 19th century in Istanbul. And his detective is Yashim, who is a eunuch, and because he's a eunuch, he can go in every part of the palace, even the harem, the areas that are purdah, only women are allowed in them. Anyway, it came up during the weekend, and there were several people in the room there, quite experienced writers. They weren't all beginners by any means, who said that that was the final thing they did. They spoke it aloud to themselves, and they did different voices, and they did really act it out.
Oh, we've got authors who do that, but also act out in the sense of like literally trying things.
Okay, Laura
Almost like,
says yes to David Bellamy, so I'm really in favor of that. And Lindsay has a good question, okay, which is
oh,
super easy for me to answer.
go on,
Who
do it.
which actor I'd choose to play Alex? So he'd have to dye his hair black because my son Felix Mosse, who is a brilliant actor, he when the quarantines at the start of lockdown happened, he was playing Marius for Cameron Mackintosh in Les Mis. The young man who sings "Empty Chairs and Empty Tables," the very sad song when all his friends have died on the barricade. So Felix is a wonderful actor, and he works with me regularly at the Criterion New Writing Program in the West End. So I think as long as we could get either the dark hair dyed because he's blonde, or maybe a wig, Felix Moss is the person for it. And he's super handsome. You find him on social media. You can look at him and tell me if I'm right. But you do have to imagine the dark hair.
Lindsay's gonna be off now to Google. We've lost a viewer because she's Googling up. So tell us a little bit about your series that's coming out next year that's more like, you said it was just more like a crime.
It is, yeah, absolutely. So one of I think that the mystery novels of Ngaio Marsh, the uh, New Zealand writer, are the best puzzles that anyone has ever written. And she wrote between, I think it was 1932 and 1982. It was a huge, long period of time. And in fact, I knew her last editor in publishing, Paul Sidey, who's died sadly, because I'm also very, very old. Um, well, just old enough. Anyway, Ngaio Marsh uh, wrote something like 35 brilliant puzzle whodunits, and she's named after the New Zealand shrub. That's why she's got the odd name Ngaio, Ngaio. And she came to the UK as a sort of colonial, and began writing in a period of horse-drawn carriages, but ended up in the modern world. And she remained brilliant at character, situation, and puzzles. So, inspired by those wonderful novels, I have set a sequence of mystery novels in 1972 in southwest Sussex, which is where I grew up. In 1972, I was 11. And the world I depict is a world of villages and very hidebound, class conscious towns. And within that world, Maisie Cooper, who is a young woman who has been brought back to her home village only to discover that her brother has died, finds out that he didn't die, he was murdered. So it's cozy, in the publishing term, in the sense that there's no threat or actual sexual violence. There's no graphic depiction of wounds or deaths. Bad things happen, but they're not reveled in, if you know what I mean. And the and at the end of the book, everything is back in its proper place because Maisie has solved the puzzle, and the right people are punished, and the right people no longer have the sword of Damocles hanging over them. So, so that's what they are now. As it happens, because I don't know if you'll remember, but those lockdowns, they went on forever, didn't they? So I've actually written 3 of them. I've edited the first one with my editor. It's not announced yet, so I can't tell you who's publishing it. So I've edited the first one. That's been sent to the typesetter, and I've got on my laptop in my writing chair, which is over in the corner of the room there behind me. I've got the second one, and tomorrow morning at 6:30, I will start editing it according to my editor's notes, and making it making it better.
Nice. And what hints can you give us about the coming storm?
Okay, so it seems to me that it's the case in most thrillers, isn't it? That it narrows to a point. It it narrows down to that fantastic unifying climax. And when that happens, when it narrows to a point, not every narrative question can be answered. Not every baddie, not every situation can be resolved. And that's where the coming storm starts. Somebody says to Alex, it's mopping up. And he says, it's only mopping up if you can see the extent of the damage. But we don't even know that yet. So that's where the coming storm starts. And of course, it has the same central characters. So you can guess that they do survive the coming darkness. Not all of them, but Alex certainly does. And so it's a continuation. It's another adventure with him at the center of it.
How many books do you envisage with him at the center? Do you think you'll finish with the coming storm, or would you like to write more?
I don't think there's a reason for it to stop. But the thing about thrillers is you do have to have a big idea. a thriller can't have, a modest climax. And I've worked with lots of writers in all the different media that we've discussed, with quiet novels and plays where the important thing might be that, I don't know, that the child is reconciled to her parents. And that's not about stopping global terrorism, or as I read recently in a Tony Kent novel, um, a gang of terrorists who've got their hands on a nuclear weapon. But in thrillers, you do tend to to need something really vast like that. Um, Happily, I've got something like that for The Coming Storm, and I would need to find something else like that for any further follow up.
Okay. What have you this is my favorite question at the moment. What have you read this year that you've really enjoyed?
So I got asked this the other day, and I actually, it was the interviewer had interrupted me reading a book on the sofa, and this is going to sound really long winded. I apologize in advance. When when I moved to Paris and I eventually became an interpreter, I was penniless. I come from an impoverished rural background, and I have had all kinds of advantages in life that have come from doing well at school, going to a school that streamed the children into different classes. So, I was told that I was clever, but in order for that to happen, three-quarters of the children had to be told that they were not. All of those terrible things. Anyway, so there I am at university and working in theatre, and I discover in the end that I don't want to be a poor fringe theatre person for any longer. It's gone on enough. And I've got this part-time job at Camberwell School of Arts and Crafts, modeling naked for the sculptors. And with the money I earned from that, I moved to Paris. So that was great. Now, it just so happened that whilst I was modeling, there was a Latin American sculptor who gave me a book to read, which was the American translation of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's novel 100 Years of Solitude, which I think is one of the most important novels ever written. A couple of years later, I saw it on a bookshelf in Paris, translated not into English, but translated into French from Colombian Spanish. And I bought it and I read it. And it's still a wonderful book. And it felt even better. It felt closer to what it ought to have been. And that was the day that I started learning Spanish because I was so impressed at how much more authentic this wonderful book seemed, even more magical. And then when I was rung the other day by this journalist who added the question, "What are you reading?" I said, "Well, I'm actually reading Cien Años de Soledad by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And it's the only book that I've ever read in three languages." So there, that's what I was reading.
So, what else have you read this year that's been your favorite things to read?
I'm very hopeful that I'm soon going to read Kate Moss's new novel because I will be proofreading the draft that she sends to her editor. That's called The Ghost Ship, and it follows on from The Burning Chambers and The City of Tears. So it's the Joubert family chronicles, who are this amazing Protestant Huguenot dynasty, who we know because of the prologue at the beginning of the first book are going to end up in South Africa. And it's that's an amazing story. I've also read two of Vaz Khan's books with his hero Persis, who is the first policewoman in the Indian police force. I've read Leslie Thompson's really evocative and absorbing novel, which is it the companion? It is the companion, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And Leslie, I always love reading her work, not just because I love her work, but also because she taught alongside me when I set up the MA in creative writing that I wrote for the University of Sussex. And so we go back ages. Can I think of another one? What's around me in my room here? Oh, this I've got another one that I can show you that I am only about 40 pages into. Perhaps somebody has read James Oswald's Prayer for the Dead. Um, like I say, I'm only 40 pages into it. On the back, it says it's the new Ian Rankin, which is that's a stretch, even for the very best writers. Oh, Yes, of course. We did get sent, because we're super lucky, we got sent a proof copy of A Heart Full of Headstones, which is Ian's new book. And I think that is a magnificent contemporary police novel.
Laura says she's excited for that book of Kate. She loved the first two in the series.
Excellent. Me too. Definitely me too. And Lindsay loves James Oswald, so that's good news.
I've got one of the books I've read recently that I really enjoyed is a book by Tom Simpson, who's at Harrogate, if you were there.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called Five Down, and I love the puzzles in it. It's all like cryptic crossword kind of puzzles that the clue the killer leaves to try and
Yeah,
taunt the people into catching him.
yeah, very good. So the killer is trying to entice people onto his trail for the sport.
Yeah.
And presumably you do crosswords, so that's why it appeals to you.
I don't do crosswords actually. Um but I just really liked the way it was written. It was just so refreshingly different.
Okay, I'll try something out on you. I was on BBC Radio Jersey the other day with a very lovely interviewer, talking about the coming darkness. And um, we talked for quite a long time. So there was not just a Michael Bublé song in the middle of the interview, but there was also a crossword clue that she gave out to her audience. And it was "Say no in the stable," 5 letters. "Say no in the stable," 5 letters. Do you know what that is?
No.
It is, exactly. Yeah. And the thing that this lovely interviewer was doing, she was actually doing different cryptic clues each day, trying to teach people to do cryptic crosswords instead of just, the word for a word synonym crosswords, which I thought was a really lovely project.
That's quite cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
Tom is quite good at trying to educate you in how to do them,
Yeah.
like
Excellent.
while he talks about the books, which is
What did you say it was called?
Five Down.
5 down. I have to get that. But the next book on my list actually is Kate and I did an interview together with Vasim Khan and Abir Mukherjee, and I haven't read any of Abir's books. And I discovered, I mentioned my friend Jason Goodwin earlier.
Mm.
Jason was the first person ever to give Abir a quote on any of his books. And we discovered in this interview this strange esoteric connection. So I've definitely got to read those. So they're early 20th century adventure stories set in Raj, India.
Yeah, I've read the first one of Abir's books. Are
Did you
great.
enjoy it?
Mm.
He's such a lovely guy. You always hope that you're going to enjoy the books of people that you like, don't you?
You do very much. Yeah. I need to make a note of Jason Goodwin's book titles as well because I used to
Okay,
live in
so
Istanbul, so it's
the
definitely a thing to read.
The first one that won an Edgar, I think, is called The Janissary Tree, Janissary. And the Janissaries, oh, Lindsay, you notice in the chat, got nay as well for the answer to the clue. The Janissaries were like the close guard of the Sultan. And the Janissary tree is it's this famous old tree in the heart of Istanbul. I think it's 1830 or maybe 1840 when they're set. That's the place to start.
Yeah, I will look it up.
Great.
Laura also enjoyed the first one of Abir's.
Oh, good.
He's quite fond of whiskey as well, I think. Have you got him on to chatting to you about whiskey and things? He's quite
Ah,
I'm sure when we had him on he was quite a fan of a Scottish whiskey.
I think he's in Iceland now for Iceland Noir, and so
Mm,
possibly he needs that whiskey to keep him warm.
that's true. That's true. That'd be amazing to be in Iceland, wouldn't it, for Iceland Noir?
It would be
Quite jealous
brilliant.
of everyone being there.
It would be lovely, yeah. But it always is, isn't it? All the festivals where you meet the delightful crime crew are just great. Kate and I will be at the Cambridge Literature Festival this weekend, which is a different sort of festival, I think. But all the same, I'll be on a panel with Jim Kelly, who writes really atmospheric novels, contemporary novels set in the Fens, with like an accidental detective who's actually a newspaper man. And then the other person on the panel is Geetha Lodge, who's whose stories are actually quite local to me here in southwest Sussex because they're set in Southampton and roundabout. So I'll be on a crime panel all the same.
Lovely. What other events have you got coming up then? Because you've been very busy.
Yeah, it has been super busy. It should be coming to an end. Um, I can't. I got a couple more radio things, but some of my plays have been. I've produced them in Suffolk because I've worked with the High Tide Festival and the Ink Festival in Suffolk, which, if anybody who's watching or listening is interested, are both potentially really great opportunities for playwriting. So on Monday, I'm doing a BBC Radio Suffolk interview because I think because they know who I am, so that's nice. But it is coming to an end because this very concentrated period, and then it will be sort of quiet over Christmas into New Year, and then there'll be a bunch of new things in the spring when festivals start up again, and then in the summer, hopefully we'll meet in Harrogate because I hope to be there talking not just about the coming darkness and the coming storm won't be out yet, but also about the cozy crime series.
Which be Matt, I love cozy crime series, so that's going to be excellent.
They're just so entertaining, aren't they? Because you know that you'll be drawn into the characters and the puzzle, um, but the author's not going to do anything that's it's just shock for the sake of shock, right? And that can sometimes happen.
So, because it's quite a broad range, isn't it? I'm thinking like The Coming Darkness. It's not like, it is a thriller, but there's not. It's not very graphic, but
No.
it's still quite a change from that to being quite a cozy crime series.
Yeah, you do have to be in a different mindset. But that doesn't feel strange to me. I mean, on the wall behind me, in amongst those theatre posters, there's one, for example, which is um, the follow-on from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and it's a play that I wrote with one of my colleagues, Lucy Flannery, about George Wickham and Lydia Bennet. You know, Lydia is the naughty daughter,
Mhm.
and they end up married, and Darcy sends them away to live in Newcastle because it's as far away as he can think of without them being, in another country. And so the play is about the follow on in their lives. And what we imagined was that Lydia, because of what she's like, highly vivacious and so on, she becomes an actress in the theatre, which is quite a scandalous thing to do in about 1830, that would be somewhere around then. Anyway, so to write that, you've got to tune in completely to that mode of speech, the expectations of a Jane Austen audience, all of that. And that's another voice again, isn't it? In the same way that I wrote a few years ago, there's a lovely park in the centre of Chichester with a friary in it from the 12th century, which was used in 1749 to try a load of smugglers who were convicted and then hanged, and their bodies left out for the crows in cages. Anyway, the story of the Hawkhurst gang is a brilliant historical story, and I wrote a two-act play using resources from history. So not completely, but kind of 60% in the language of the time, without making it impossible to follow. So again, it's a switch in. It's like a mental switch, and you tune into the language of it, and then you stick with those parameters. So yeah, you're right. It's a very perceptive question, but it is something that is possible to do.
And I guess probably that experience again, like we've gone back to before, the script writing and all of that other experience you've had has helped.
Yeah, it's so helpful. And of course, working on everybody else's plays. One of the posters behind me is a play written by so some of you may have seen the TV series Manifest, which is about a plane that goes missing. It's currently on Netflix, like third or fourth series. And before that, Lupin, which is about the French gentleman thief, and another one called Messiah, that was set. Anyway, my colleague Samira Srivastav, who is a wonderful writer, she's worked over the last couple of years on all of those TV shows as a writer. Before that, she and I worked together on her script Accession, which is about the Moroccan ambassador to the court of Elizabeth I, so around 1600, who comes with the idea that Morocco and England should form an alliance against the Catholics in Spain. So the Protestants and the Muslims against the Catholics in Spain. And also, why not that the Sultan of Morocco could marry Elizabeth I, because the Moroccan ambassador has heard that she's never married. So maybe that would be a thing to seal the alliance. So that's all super interesting as a historical context. But there was two other things just to add into this mix. In the time of Elizabeth I, she signed essentially a law which said that it would be a good idea if all the black people went home because they've been taking all our jobs. And this happened around 1600 AD. And it's a brilliant immigration story which reframes that immigration question as a perennial thing, a perennial response of othering people who aren't native, who aren't indigenous. And is super interesting because of that. And then the final thing, this Moroccan ambassador is the guy who inspired Shakespeare to write Othello, because Shakespeare met him. Isn't that all wonderful? Anyway, all of those things together are things that I researched because I was working with Samira, and they now form part of my intellectual baggage, or if you like, the soil, the intellectual soil, or the imaginative soil in which I can grow stories. Things that I come across because I worked with her, and just like that, all the other people I've worked with, they all provide this fertile mulch out of which I get I get a bigger range of ideas than if it was just me in my room on my own.
And I think all of that is what leading to what Lindsay is saying about your book, which is that it's a thinker's thriller.
That's really nice of her to say that. When my wife Kate's novel Labyrinth came out, somebody put in a review that it's adventure with A levels, which is quite similar, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah, that's what a nice description that
It
is.
is good, yeah.
Um, does that help having someone sort of close to hand like Kate, who's had all that experience of launching books? Has that been like a bit of a comfort and a support kind of launch on
No,
your own?
it's more than that. You know, she is, to start with, a creative genius. Then she's a brilliant editor of her own work, and therefore she can apply that to other people. And also, she was an editorial director before she was a writer, so there's nothing she doesn't know about publishing. I mean, if I can't make a go of it with her on my side, I should probably give up, right? It might be worth saying just like how the sequence of events goes, because when I say to people that I've written, four books over the last 2.5 years, but bear in mind I was made unemployed from theatre because theatre was made illegal, right? Um, it it's still a very long and laborious process because I write the first draft, then I edit it on my own, so I've got draft two, then I show that to Kate, and then she tells me a bunch of things and I rewrite it. So that's draft three. Give draft three to my agents, and they've got their own ideas, so I rewrite it. Then I give it to my editor at the publishing house, and there's two more drafts there as well. You know, the structural edit thing, and then the copy line edit thing. And that's how you. I guess that's how you polish it and make sure everything is internally consistent, that that it doesn't feel slack anywhere. That's the idea, I think. That perhaps amalgamate characters. In fact, the very first draft of The Coming Darkness was so long that I took out 2 subplots, and they're gonna figure in The Coming Storm. So, there's that can be a benefit of it as well. But in any case, it's, even when I've got a complete script, there's 4 or 5 drafts still to go.
So, in honor of Sam, I'm gonna ask you one of her favorite questions because she's not feeling very well.
Shame.
Um, so she likes to ask what the most recent scene is that you've written without giving away a spoiler.
Oh, yeah, I don't have to give away a spoiler. So this is in the, second cozy crime novel, and it's a really cool scene, I think, that I like very much, where my hero, Maisie, knows something, to the discredit of the organist in this village in the Sussex Downs. And she doesn't directly confront him with what she knows, but she makes sure that he knows that she knows in order to put pressure on him and see what he does. And that was a really fun scene to write. It would be generally, I think, for any writer. And then, of course, for me, it's especially fun because it's principally a dialogue scene, and the rhythm of that dialogue is something that I love doing.
Gonna give you some of our other favorite UK-CBC questions as well.
Yeah, go for it.
But since you're here, it's your first interview.
Yeah,
Here are some of our sort of tried and tested favorites. Would
good.
you make a graphic novel of your book?
Well, that's a very interesting question because I'm currently working with. I have a business partner, Lou, who's Laura Lou Doy, who and we've done quite a lot of work in augmented reality, and it was a brilliant thing that we were able to do during lockdown because we could work remotely and on screen, and we could keep that strand of our creative work going. Now, the thing that Lou and I are currently making, we're not the creative technologists or the artists, but we're the producers, is what's called a motion book, which is like a graphic novel, but it's online, two-dimensional, and it has elements that move. So it's like a comic book online, but it has elements that move. So the camera or the viewpoint might pan across a landscape, or a character who is shifty, their eyes might move. Um, the basis for this thing that we're making is a brilliant short story by Kate Mosse, as it happens, called The Ship of the Dead, which she wrote inspired by Breton legend, from the coast of Brittany, about the man who is condemned to ferry the souls of the drowned into death. And it's a gothic story in Kate's collection, The Mistletoe Bride and Other Stories. And so the answer to the UK CBC question is, would I? I currently am, but it's my wife's story, not mine.
Excellent. But you'd be open to it for yours as well.
Oh, God, yes. In fact, I was reading one of Anthony Horowitz's the other day. I can't remember. It was an Alex Rider story that was drawn up as quite a long and very sophisticated graphic novel. Yeah, I'm a big admirer. But I think anybody who's lived in France is very exposed to graphic novels. They're seen as much more, grown up, I think, than they are in the UK.
It's Anthony Johnston who adapts the Alex Rider ones.
Is it?
Yes, he was on in our Spook Fest.
Ah,
We're at the coldest city, which is what Atomic Blonde is made from.
okay.
But he does the Alex Rider books as well.
Excellent. Is there another classic UK CBC question?
There are many.
Okay, go on. Go do
So,
another one.
your most memorable moments as an author so far?
Well, it has to be as an author of plays. When we came out of lockdown in August, not this one just gone, but the one before, so that was 21, August 21, a um, a play that I wrote before coronavirus was performed, and we toured it. And the last performance, yeah, it was the last performance, was in an outdoor theatre in Thorrington, which is not far from Southwold in Suffolk, um, with about 300 people present, enjoying this script with songs, and the songs are all ancient English folk songs that I've adapted and woven into the script to tell a story of grief and ghosts. And it was completely magical, not just because it was great performance from two brilliant actors and two musicians that I often work with, but also because it was such a release. Open air theatre, you see, it was, even if people were worried they weren't to go to an indoor theatre, people weren't worried about going to the outdoor theatre. And it was a magical summer evening of performances. And so that's my best moment as a writer.
Excellent. Sam quite likes to ask what resources you would recommend to someone who's starting out as a writer.
What resources?
Hmm.
Okay, so I obviously read super widely. You don't have to read things that you don't enjoy. Read all the things that you enjoy, but as widely as possible. But I'd say this, the thing you need most of all is the knack of invention. In other words, you don't get stuck if you're good at making up more stuff to happen. So in all the teaching I do with the playwrights at the Criterion or the workshops I do for festivals, that's how I teach. I don't tell people whether their sentences are any good or their paragraphs are any good. I say to them, what happened next? And what could you write that happened before that that would make that thing more meaningful? And that is story development. It is the knack of invention. So that's the thing. That's the resource that you want. And it isn't like a God-given thing. It's something you practice and develop.
So we've got 3 minutes left. I could listen to you all night, but we have 3 minutes left.
That's because you're a lovely person.
And you're fascinating to talk to. Remind everyone of what they are going to go and buy if they've been as fascinated by listening to you as I have been. If there's a particular bookshop you would like them to source it from, some of our members like an indie bookshop. Do
Well,
that as well. Show off your book cover.
obviously, I went into Goldsboro the other night and I signed 50 copies for Goldsboro of The Coming Darkness by Greg Mosse with its glorious gradient sprayed edges. On the day of publication, actually, I don't think Amazon were necessarily very convinced that they were going to sell many of them, because on the day of publication they ran out at 2 o'clock. So I don't know if they only took half a dozen or something. I really don't mind which shop you buy it from. Goldsboro obviously will send it to you in the post, but your local bookshop has access to copies, and they'll get it in for you. But then, in the end, it's like, some of you may have seen the thing that my wife does, which is called Moss on a Monday. She does a YouTube thing every once a month, and she talks about 4 books that she loves, and not necessarily recent publications. And then at the end of her Moss on a Monday, she sometimes says, like they do on Strictly, they say keep dancing. She says keep reading. That's the only thing that matters, isn't it? Wherever is convenient for you to buy The Coming Darkness, I'll be happy.
As long as you buy it and keep reading. Donna says thank you both. It's been great. She's looking forward to tomorrow.
Yeah,
So
I'm going to talk to Donna tomorrow, I hope.
She says it won't be as gentle as this.
I will see. Maybe I'll fight back.
And then I'll also have to say thanks. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
And from me to you, thank you very much.